Princess Aeryn of the Thalari court laughed in the middle of first contact. Not because the human ambassador threatened her, not because he insulted her crown, but because he smiled. He stood there in a plain, dark uniform, face bruised from the shuttle crash, and he smiled as if the universe had handed him good news instead of disaster. The court recoiled, because among the Thalari, showing teeth was an ancient predator's signal, and Princess Aeryn asked, "Does Earth train its diplomats to greet royalty like hungry beasts?" The chamber rippled with laughter, but the human only bowed and answered, "My name is Daniel Vale, Your Highness. On Earth this means I come in peace." That amused her even more because this human, dusty, smiling, calm, looked far too ordinary to represent a species frontier reports described as impossible to break. She dismissed him before sunset and ordered the archives to note that humans disguised aggression behind pleasant faces. She thought the matter ended there. She was wrong, because some mistakes do not begin with war, they begin with laughter. 3 weeks later, the throne sent her to Earth as part of a cultural concession after the shuttle incident. And Aeryn accepted only because she intended to prove that humanity was an overrated species, living on old legends and improvised manners. Daniel Vale was assigned as her liaison, and from the moment her craft entered Earth airspace, she felt the insult of the world. It was too loud, too green, too scarred, too alive. Storms rolled over oceans like charging armies. Cities glittered beside rivers that had flooded before. Mountains wore roads cut into their bones. And everywhere she looked, there were signs that this species had built its home in argument with nature. Daniel met her in a rainy landing field with a smile on his face. He smiled at the mechanics, smiled at a child waving through a fence, and each time someone smiled back as if he had handed them a small invisible gift. Aeryn found it absurd, then irritating, then difficult to ignore. Because on Thalira, every expression carried calculation. But these humans spent smiles like they were renewable. She asked him on the second day. "Do humans not understand how fragile dignity is?" He laughed softly and said, "We understand exactly how fragile everything is. That is why we do this." She nearly dismissed him again. Then an old woman at a roadside market dropped half her produce in the mud. Daniel was there before the guards moved, gathering fruit, apologizing for nothing he had done, smiling at her until the woman began smiling too. And somehow the whole miserable moment changed shape. The rain was still falling, the loss was still real. Yet the woman stood straighter. That was the first crack in Aeryn's certainty. By the 5th day, Daniel had taken her far from capitals and ceremony, down into the practical bloodstream of Earth. Freight ports, clinics, farming belts, storm shelters. Places where speeches died quickly and useful hands mattered more than noble names. There she saw smiles where reason said none should exist. A welder with burned knuckles grinning through a long shift. A medic smiling at a frightened child before stitching his arm. Exhausted farmers smiling over bitter coffee while flood sirens sounded. And every time Aeryn asked why, Daniel gave her a different answer that somehow meant the same thing. Because it helps. Because fear hates company. Because someone has to go first. Because if you wait until life is easy, you will never smile at all. She heard laughter in blackout shelters, jokes in hospital corridors, songs sung by workers knee-deep in ruin. And none of it felt foolish anymore. It felt defiant. Then came the night that burned the lesson into her. A seismic storm tore through the Western Plate cities without warning. The sky turned white with static. Transit lines failed, towers shuddered. And the delegation convoy was trapped beneath a fractured overpass while emergency bands screamed across every channel. Aeryn had never seen disaster move so fast. One moment a city shimmered with light. The next it was sirens, dust, and broken glass. Her guards formed a protective ring around her. But Daniel was already moving away from safety, smiling at people covered in blood and ash, guiding them toward open ground, lifting debris with strangers. Helping a little boy breathe through terror, it enraged her. How dare he wear that expression here? Among the screams, among the dead, how dare he smile when the world was splitting open? Then she understood. Because every person he reached clung to that smile like a railing in deep water. It was not joy, it was not ignorance, it was a signal: I am still here. You are still here. We are not finished. Even when smoke drove tears from his eyes, he kept smiling, and people kept moving. The wounded rose, the panicked steadied, the trapped endured long enough to be found. At dawn, the city looked like a battlefield, and yet fires were being extinguished, names were being called, hands were digging, kitchens were opening, blankets were shared, and through all of it, Earth kept smiling. Not because pain was small, but because surrender would have been smaller. Aeryn sat on the cracked steps of an emergency shelter, royal cloak torn, silver hands trembling, and watched Daniel hand out water with dried blood on his cheek. When he finally sat beside her, she asked, "What does it mean, truly?" He looked over the wreckage, the volunteers, the families clinging to one another beneath a bruised sunrise, and answered in a voice worn thin by the night. "It means I see you. It means I am not your enemy. It means this moment does not own us. It means there is still something in me disaster could not take." Aeryn lowered her gaze then, because she had mocked what she did not understand. On Thalira, a smile could be vanity or weakness, but on Earth it was courage in its most portable form. Carried on exhausted faces into hospitals, fires, funerals, and wars. A quiet banner that said the soul remained unconquered. When she returned to the Sapphire Throne months later, the court gathered, expecting another elegant report on alien manners. Instead, she stood before them all, bared her teeth in the old forbidden way, and smiled. Guards flinched, nobles froze, and Princess Aeryn said, "On Earth, this is not a threat. This is what hope looks like when it refuses to die." And for once, in that glittering, cruel court, nobody laughed.